Thank you. I would actually like to move on to Dr. Krona. Dr. Krona is specialized on the social media presence, especially of ISIS, but I believe that today he's also going to talk or touch upon certain terrorist groups in Jammu and Kashmir. And it might be of interest to you, Dr. Krona, that a lot of participants who have joined us are from the region of Kashmir, so they are probably eagerly waiting to listen to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. I just want to say in reference to what you just said, I will not talk specifically about groups in the region. I would like to present, as a media scholar, I would like to present a development in the use of technology that also concerns regions in South Asia. And I think it's just, it will be a bit more general, but I would be happy to take question afterwards concerning some specific issues on this. So let me just share my screen first. And we're going to use this. I hope you can see my screen. My background is that I have worked on, in particular, Islamic State media for 7 years. I started in 2014 as from an academic perspective and tried to understand the role of technology, the role of social media in concerning the Islamic State. But that has evolved, and currently I have quite a wide interest in other groups as well, of course. And I think it's important also to know that I base my arguments here today on about having gone through maybe 2,000 propaganda videos, I don't know how many hours of monitoring online communities that are connected to mainly the Islamic State, but also Al-Qaeda. And of course, other type of propaganda material. So I would like to use this opportunity to look at certain trends in this development. And I have three main arguments that I would like to touch upon here. The first one is that I see a increased or an accelerating mediatization of jihadist groups, which basically means that not just that a vast amount of propaganda is being produced, but also that the modus operandi of many jihadist groups is adapted to a form of logic in sort of the media industry and how media works. And in particular, I think it's interesting to see how ideology and scripture are increasingly being visualized to a new audience and new supporters online. My second argument is that mainly the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda networks online have become increasingly fragmented. They are more separate from their organization, more independent, and also more intertwined with other jihadist groups. There are natural ideological differences between, for instance, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but the online communities are harder today to differentiate between the different groups, because we see, for instance, how Al-Qaeda supporters online are celebrating and spreading Taliban propaganda. So it's these boundaries have dissolved more or less. And thirdly, in relation to Central and South Asia, I have an argument that propaganda from regional jihadist groups and affiliates to Islamic State or to Al-Qaeda in this region is refining in the last 2 years, due to, of course, geopolitical development and also technological advancement. I would like to explore this further in a few minutes. So starting with the first one, the mediatization of transnational jihadism is accelerating. The fact that groups are forming online communities of supporters, or these communities are formed around certain jihadist groups is of course nothing new. We've had terrorist organizations that have been online for 2 decades and had activities there. What we see, what is new, and I think is an interesting development, is that there is a greater reliance on online communities today than it was maybe only 10 years ago. The media groups and media collectives and supporters that go together online to produce pro-Islamic State content or pro-Al-Qaeda content without having any official sort of affiliation to the organization has increased substantially. The left image on the screen here, Al-Batara, is a supporter group for the Islamic State, for instance. And I think the propaganda, the narratives, the different forms of messaging have become increasingly visualized. And this poses new challenges and new questions because it contributes to new practices of interpretation of scripture or ideology or application of these type of ideologies. It's different for a media audience, for supporters around the world, for instance, to the Islamic State, to consume ideology through visual memes or through TikTok videos rather than reading scripture, which is, and I think that forms a new generation of jihadists. And I think it's important for us to understand how it differs when supporters are increasingly interpreting ideology and scripture through visual means. So this increased mediatization of jihadism, I find is really interesting and important. And we can see it here as well. If we look at content itself, the visual style of jihadist propaganda has adapted to cultural references of imagery, narration, image composition. And I think in recent time, especially concerning maybe the Taliban, but also the Islamic State, tries to signify credibility through its use of visual media, try to signify authority, especially when it's involved in political sort of or geopolitical relations. So we see the Taliban, we see HDS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, who really utilize this visualization in their propaganda currently. And that's part of this first argument, that it's been an accelerating or acceleration of mediatization. The second one, that Islamic State and Al-Qaeda primarily, if you look at their online communities, have become more fragmented. I would argue, and I have argued in the last year or two, that what characterizes the online communities around especially Islamic State and Al-Qaeda is that there is a detachment from the original single organization, which means that loyalty has become less important towards the actual organization, and instead online supporters form new alliances based on ideological sharing, of course, but not necessarily to the organization itself. Increased collaboration between supporters online. Of course, we have a media landscape which allows this form of collaboration and participation to advance its causes. But this also is a factor in the growth of online communities and becoming more and more separate from maybe the single organization. We also see this blurring of affiliation boundaries, where, as I mentioned before, Al-Qaeda supporters can promote the Taliban cause because it helps Al-Qaeda in the long run. So I think it's just following these groups online, you can see that trends are emerging, and I think these three aspects of the online communities are very it really characterizes the present time of the media aspect or mediatization aspect of jihadist terrorism. When it comes to the regional jihadist groups, as I mentioned before, the Khorasan, the Kashmir region, I believe that there has been a refinement of propaganda, of messaging, and a development of messaging connected to these regions in the last, at least in the last 2 years. This has, of course, reasons in geopolitical developments and technological advancements. South Asia, just like Central Asia, of course, and Southeast Asia, has a very strong and important history of jihadist groups and development within the global jihadist movements that is quite essential when we try to understand the current developments. It's like the equivalent would be other parts of the world that, for instance, have had many foreign fighters who traveled to Iraq and Syria to join the Islamic State in their caliphate. These individuals who are still alive has maybe been relocated to other parts of the region, but those parts of the world, including South Asia, that has had several travelers there, that is an important part because it says something about the domestic environment and jihadist environments and conflicts in, for instance, Jammu and Kashmir, that is still ongoing and very, very sort of prominent currently. The Kashmir region, the Khorasan region are essential for the Islamic State. They are essential for Al-Qaeda. These groups have different agendas maybe, but they are currently important regional and political dimensions in their larger sort of global strategies. Already in 2019, a report from ICCT claimed that regional affiliates like the Islamic State in the Hind province, for instance, has the capability to attract individuals who support a more anti-India or subcontinent specific agenda within the broader pan-Islamist ideology. So the concept or sort of the dimension of nationalism and resistance, I think, is really important when we try to understand the emergence and further development of jihadist groups in these regions. And the online networks, the use of technology in relation to these regions are also that it functions to reconnect foreign fighters who travel with the homegrown environments, with the homegrown affiliates that exist, and really at the same time also serve to expand the support in the region. And as you can see, there is always this skepticism when you go into online communities or encrypted communication between supporters. But it's genuinely the role of media technology and formation of online communities has a very, very important role to play when we try to understand what has happened, for instance, after the fall of the caliphate in Iraq and Syria, because as you know, the Islamic State advanced into Africa. Al-Qaeda is very active in Northern Africa, and it moves around. And I think the Kashmir region, the Khorasan provinces are regions that are especially important at this current stage. Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, AQIS, has recently also increased its communication of authority. And we see that Islamic State provinces in Khorasan, the ISKP, that has been very, very highlighted in the last few months in regards to what has happened in Afghanistan. And also the more non-official province of the Hind province of the Islamic State have very active regional propaganda production. They produce in different languages. When it comes to ISKP, it is mainly claims of attacks, very much visual media as well, sometimes very gruesome videos. And from the Hind province, it is they have a monthly magazine that is published in different languages. So the regional sort of media production and propaganda production of these groups, both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, is part of a development where you have minor affiliates or minor jihadist groups that attach their name to a larger network, either Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, and wins exposure in that sense. And it's also sort of like a win-win situation for the larger entities, the larger organizations as well, who needs that type of presence in these regions. So I think there are many, of course, trends that you can see or developments you can see when you follow this as closely as I try to follow the online communities. But I would sort of summarize it into, we have a development now after the fall of the caliphate in Iraq and Syria that minor affiliates to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda use this moment of attaching to a larger entity for exhibiting strength and success. And it becomes very enhanced through the use of various social media technologies. The Al-Qaeda network is expanding, and I've written here, much due to earlier deviation from doctrines. So about a decade ago, when Zawahiri deliberately chose to expand and focus more on the importance of building ties with local communities across the Islamic world that were felt under threat, that sort of became a success strategy for Al-Qaeda to also grow under the radar, under the spotlight, when the Islamic State had sort of was on the world stage since 2014. And Al-Qaeda, I believe, has a more long-term sort of strategy for survival and expansion than maybe the Islamic State has, at least if I look at it from a media strategic perspective. And we've heard here from Dr. Maran earlier about the Taliban, but I just want to second that this acceleration of propaganda efforts using both the analog and digital model for information warfare is highly essential for the Taliban. Now we're also in governance using traditional mass media entities as well as the digital and still also to a large extent encrypted digital social media for cultivating the ideology. And now on a final point as well, what does all this development mean, regardless actually of where we are looking? I think this advancement in technology poses both challenges and opportunities, of course, when it comes to state responses and intelligence communities work to counter. But even if there is often a celebration of the prevent or counter-terrorism work that takes place from states or intelligence or law enforcement communities when it comes to using technology or finding evidence in the use of technology, it still raises larger questions on the fact that states actually have this technological superiority or of sort of surveillance and everything like that comes with it. So I think in the next few years, we will have these discussions, not just what happens within the jihadist communities and organizations and how they connect to each other, but also how the state actually handles that responsibility of having a technological superiority. So I think this is a development that is in general, and it's relevant for different parts of the world. But considering what has happened in the last few months in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and also in South Asia and on the Indian subcontinent, I think this new phase of how jihadist organizations use social media and technology will be heavily discussed in the months to come here, because I think we're in a very interesting phase and of development. So I would like to thank there and would be happy to take questions now after. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krona. Please just in between let me allow to welcome Malez Daoud as well. Welcome. And
thank you so much.
Dr. Krona, very, very, very interesting presentation, very technical as well. And you've triggered quite a debate, I guess. We'll go to the questions overall at the end, but just two small questions, which I think you can quickly comment on. One is not a question; it's basically a statement, but perhaps inviting you to comment on that, is that the statement is there are no jihadist groups in Kashmir. That's one. And the second is, what do you exactly mean by jihad or jihadist movement? So if you can take this, then
the details of the Kashmir region, as a media researcher, I have to admit, like, I don't know the details. What I know is that there are individuals who has joined the Islamic State, for instance, from the region, and I know that the region is often referred to in Islamic State propaganda. So that sort of bases my assumption that the region is of strategic importance, and I'm sure there are, just like there are in other parts of Central and South Asia, there is an existing support, of course, for the Islamic State and that ideology. When it comes to the jihadist movement, I talk very broadly about the global jihadist movement that sort of stems from Al-Qaeda in the 1990s and up until today. It has many variations, it has many interpretations, but it's a very general and broad term, but it's mainly connected to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State.